The enigmatic order, unveiling the assassins. They left no banners unfurled, no anthems sung aloud, not a single official decree to mark their existence. Yet, the mere utterance of their name, assassin, was enough to plunge kings into the chilling grip of nocturnal dread. For a span exceeding 150 years, they moved with the imperceptible grace of shadows, striking without prelude, vanishing as if into thin air. They were known by a multitude of epithets: the Nasari, the Ismaili, and the Hashishin. That final designation, Hashishin, reverberates through history like a sinister incantation, perpetually entwined with bloodshed, an aura of impenetrable darkness, and secrets that the annals of time have yet to fully unravel. Who truly were these figures? What propelled their deadly purpose? And why, even in our contemporary age, does history remain unable to fully illuminate the enigma of their existence? Tonight, we embark on a journey into the narrative of humanity's most profoundly mysterious organization. Our quest is not merely to recount their infamous assassinations, but to delve into the profound silence they left in their wake. Therefore, find solace, close your eyes, and allow the whispers of history to envelop you. The dawn of a silent power. While colossal empires clashed over every fragmented inch of territory and vied for every fleeting spark of loyalty among their populace. In a secluded and unforgiving expanse nestled within Persia's Alborz Mountains, a small cadre quietly forged a dominion uniquely their own. They possessed no discernible nation, no sprawling military might, yet they wielded an asset that no contemporary dynasty was sagacious enough to perceive as the most formidable weapon of all. The insidious power to sow profound terror deep within the adversary's very core. The architect of this clandestine order was Hassan I-Sabbah, a distinguished scholar, a profound thinker, and a man ostracized by the prevailing Islamic religious establishment of his era. He harbored no aspirations of prophethood, nor did he entertain dreams of assembling a conquering army akin to his contemporaries. Instead, he embraced wisdom, patience, and meticulously calculated strategy as the bedrock of his burgeoning movement. At the formidable Alamut fortress, a stronghold he claimed not through brute force but through astute cunning and unyielding conviction, he commenced the rigorous training of men who would, in due course, irrevocably alter the course of history. The precise happenings behind the impenetrable walls of Alamut remained shrouded in mystery. However, survivors of their targeted assassinations frequently recounted that these assailants were unlike any they had ever encountered. They were characterized by an unnerving tranquility, an absolute silence, and an unshakable resolve. They neither fled nor exhibited any discernible fear of death. And it was this, more so than the act of killing itself, that instilled genuine terror in those who held power. It was not their demise that bewildered, but the utter inability to comprehend how an individual could extinguish life with such serene placidity in their gaze. In a world where authority was quantified by the expanse of empires, the size of armies, and the rivers of blood spilled by thousands, the assassins required only a single blade and one soul willing to embrace death to fundamentally shift the political landscape. They did not wage war against a nation, they contended against a pervasive system. A system where only the mighty arrogated the right to dictate who would live and who would perish. Hassan I-Sabbah astutely recognized their inability to withstand a direct confrontation. They were compelled to become unseen, allowing their adversaries to crumble beneath the crushing weight of their own anxieties. This transcended mere tactical maneuvering, it was a profound philosophy. Within Alamut, there was no room for unquestioning, blind allegiance. Those selected to become Fidai, those prepared for ultimate self-sacrifice, were not merely instructed in the use of weaponry, but also rigorously trained in philosophy, strategic acumen, and an unwavering conviction in the righteousness of their mission. They were far more than simple assassins. They were the living embodiment of armed conviction. And precisely because they sought no personal gain, no fleeting renown, and left behind nothing but the demise of their designated target, No one could ever anticipate their point of origin. Anyone could become a target. No one was beyond their reach. Such was the sheer brilliance of their strategy. To implant an amorphous fear into the very hearts of their enemies, compelling them to self-destruct under the relentless shadow of pervasive paranoia. It is often overlooked that the Hashishin were not creatures of malevolence, as popular narratives might suggest. They possessed their own intricate philosophy, a profound system of thought. And they genuinely believed they were confronting oppression through the potent combination of intellect and sacrifice. Yet, history rarely extends clemency to those who diverge from the established order of power. Consequently, instead of being immortalized as astute strategists or revolutionary ideologues, they were branded with a contemptuous moniker, Hashishin, users of hashish, a derogatory term designed to besmirch the very faith for which they lived and died. And despite the egregious distortions of their story, their enduring legacy persists. A modest group, devoid of an army or a kingdom, managed to instill terror across an entire Middle Eastern region, preventing its inhabitants from finding restful sleep. And even now, as the venerable fortress of Alamut lies in desolate ruins, with countless questions still lingering unanswered, the profound fear they once ignited has never truly dissipated. Alamut, the fortress of unseen power. The fortress of Alamut was not constructed solely from stone. It was meticulously forged from the silent resilience of those who believed the world could be transformed not by the clash of swords, but by the unyielding force of an unshakable ideal. Perched precariously on a sheer cliff face within the Alborz Mountains, Alamut appeared to reside on the very precipice between the known world and the forbidden. From its commanding heights, infiltration was a near impossibility, and once within its confines, few ever truly departed. It evolved into a pivotal strategic bastion, a clandestine laboratory of radical thought, and the vibrant, beating heart of a hidden force that the world, to this day, struggles to comprehend. No outsider genuinely understood the nature of the training conducted within Alamut's walls. Yet fragmented narratives from those who miraculously survived assassination attempts painted a picture bordering on the mythical. Young recruits, some as tender as 15 years of age, were not inducted into the fortress to be instructed in the art of killing, but rather to grasp the profound necessity of their readiness to die. They immersed themselves in the study of philosophy, theology, strategic planning, and cryptography. Their motivation was not born of coercion or terror, but of profound conviction, the notion that the world was ensnared by false powers, and that only through ultimate self-sacrifice could this pervasive falsehood be undone. Legends persist that Hassan I-Sabah orchestrated a simulated paradise within Alamut, a realm where the young initiates were transported to experience overwhelming sensory delight, only to be abruptly returned to the harsh reality. He would then impress upon them that what they had witnessed was a fleeting glimpse of the eternal reward awaiting those who demonstrated absolute loyalty. While numerous historians harbor skepticism regarding the literal veracity of this tale, it undeniably reflects a deeper, underlying truth. This order did not merely command actions. It masterfully cultivated unwavering belief. And once an individual is convinced that death is the solitary pathway to everlasting recompense, the insidious grip of fear loses its power. Within their rigorous training, the assassins meticulously honed the art of dissolving seamlessly into crowds, adopting various guises such as servants, pilgrims, and even those with disabilities, all with the singular objective of drawing near to their intended target. They eschewed grand, conspicuous weaponry. A concealed dagger, a subtly poisoned needle, a single, precise strike to the heart, that was all it required to extinguish the life of a king. Yet, the ultimate objective was never solely to kill. The paramount goal was to transmit an unequivocal message. Regardless of how potent one believed themselves to be, an unseen hand possessed the capacity to reach their throat at any given instant. This surgical precision was precisely what rendered the assassins so utterly terrifying. No one possessed the knowledge of how to effectively defend against them. Every instance a figure of authority perished under enigmatic circumstances, encircled by guards within a sanctuary, or lost amidst a bustling crowd, all gazes instinctively turned towards Alamotte. Yet, no one possessed concrete proof. No one witnessed their arrival. No one observed their departure. Only the pervasive shadow of fear lingered, spreading, tightening its grip, and slowly eroding the confidence of every court from within. Not merely kings and princes, but scholars, clerics, generals, indeed, anyone who posed a threat to the Ismaili ideal, could fall victim to their silent wrath. This rendered the assassins an anonymous adversary in the perception of much of the Islamic world. And yet, this anonymity also rendered them nearly impossible to eradicate. They were not a nation. They had no defined borders, no standing army to be decisively defeated. They were an idea, fueled by the profound frustrations of those relegated to the margins of history, to the external world. They were deemed fanatical, Hashishan, minds manipulated by the intoxicating illusions of paradise. But within the unyielding stone walls of Alamotte, they referred to each other as Fidai, the ones who sacrificed, not to kill for cruel amusement, but to safeguard a truth that the world desperately sought to bury. And in that sanctuary, amidst its ancient stones and shadowed corridors, they transmuted unwavering loyalty into the most formidable weapon the world had ever witnessed. The echo of a silent strike. Noteworthy assassinations. No drums heralded their approach, no grand declarations of war preceded their actions, and no armies marched openly. Yet, each time a nobleman collapsed amidst a multitude, blood gushing from his heart as he exited a mosque or sat upon his throne, an entire kingdom was seized by profound tremor. The identity of the killer remained unknown. No footprints were ever discovered. Only a singular rumor echoed ceaselessly across the lands. The men of Alamotte have acted. One of the earliest and most profoundly shocking assassinations was the demise of Nizam al-Mulk, the Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire. This man wielded near-absolute authority under Sultan Malik Shah. He was a brilliant statesman, the visionary founder of the madrasa school system, and the most fervent adversary of the Ismaili sect. In the year 1092, while undertaking a pilgrimage, Nizam was approached by a stranger cloaked as a wandering mystic. With a single, impeccably precise stab, he was instantly killed. The assassin, in turn, was immediately slain, but the message delivered was unequivocally clear. His identity and motive left little room for doubt. He was a Fidai, dispatched from Alamotte. Nizam's death was not merely a personal execution. It was a devastating blow aimed directly at the very heart of Seljuk power. It fundamentally shook the political foundations, unleashing widespread chaos and creating fissures through which the Ismailis could cunningly slip, ensuring their survival and expansion. This served as the inaugural lesson for the ruling elite. In their right hands, a solitary dagger possessed the power to reshape the destiny of an empire. In the subsequent years, a cascade of prominent figures met their untimely ends: governors, judges, military commanders. What rendered these killings even more chilling was their sheer audacity. They were not executed in the veiled secrecy of night. They transpired in broad daylight, openly witnessed by crowds, as if deliberately orchestrated to resonate across the entirety of the land. From Persia to Syria, the name, Hashishin, was whispered with escalating terror, spreading more rapidly than any invading army could ever hope to. Some victims were killed while delivering sermons. Others were stabbed within the privacy of their own homes, amidst secret meetings with their most trusted advisors. Some collapsed at the very gates of mosques, surrounded by thousands of onlookers. And yet, no one ever witnessed the killer's approach. This was the unequivocal message the assassins sought to impart to the world. Not even sacred ground could offer protection. Another assassination that sent shockwaves reverberating through Christendom was the slaying of Conrad of Montferrat, a powerful Christian noble in the Holy Land during the Crusades. In 1192, mere days after being elected king of Jerusalem, he was stabbed to death in the streets by two men. They did not attempt to flee, they calmly accepted their impending execution. and once again. The trail of causality led back to a singular, enigmatic location, Alamut. What proves even more astonishing is that in certain instances, rulers were compelled to purchase their own safety. Dispatching gifts, letters, or entering into secret treaties with the assassins in the desperate hope of evading death. When an adversary could not be vanquished, individuals resorted to bribery as a means of survival. This transformed the assassins into something far more than a mere terrorist group. They evolved into a covert political force, wielding the power to influence appointments, forge alliances, and even dictate royal successions. The world of that era was forced to confront a terrifying reality. When death could arrive at the hands of an anonymous stranger, and no one possessed the means to prevent it, power itself became meaningless. That was the authentic weapon wielded by the assassins. They had no need to control vast territories. They only needed to control the minds of those who held power. Over the passage of time, people ceased to utter their name aloud. They transmuted into ghosts, a mere whisper, an ever-present dread lurking within palaces and churches. Those who dared to oppose the Ismaili cause knew precisely what awaited them. Not because they were weak, but because they fully grasped that somewhere in the enveloping shadows, a blade lay in wait for the precise moment they turned their backs. There is one terror that consumes rulers more profoundly than sudden death: the agonizing uncertainty of the killer's whereabouts, or even their true identity. This is where the assassins decisively outmaneuvered every other force of their time. They commanded no massive army. Yet, their message possessed the astonishing ability to spread across the entire Middle East within a matter of days. A name inscribed on a flimsy scrap of paper. A kill order disseminated without leaving any trace of its origin or its ultimate destination. This invisible network was where the assassins truly thrived. No one knows precisely how they communicated. There is no surviving evidence of carrier birds or official couriers. Yet, stories persist of messages traversing through nothing more than a fleeting gaze, a cryptic phrase, or an object precisely positioned in the correct location. A single command could traverse deserts, scale towering mountains, and penetrate borders, arriving in the hands of the designated individual at the opportune moment. It all seemed to move through a language comprehensible only to them. A concealed web intricately woven from trust, ritual, and profound symbolism. The silent language and unseen networks. The identifiers of the assassins were deceptively simple. A small dagger wedged into a doorframe, a coin intricately engraved with a towering structure, a strip of cloth meticulously tied to a tree. To outsiders, these were utterly meaningless. But to a Fidai, they were vital codes of survival, undeniable signs that they were not solitary in this unseen war. There is another peculiar aspect. The assassins almost never committed words to writing. No official documents, no explicit commands articulated in plain language. And when they did leave messages, they were cleverly embedded within poetry, verses from the Quran, or symbols that appeared entirely random. This is precisely why modern historians grapple with their existence. Not because there is an absence of discoverable artifacts, but because everything is veiled in such a multitude of layered meanings that no one can definitively ascertain what is real. Within the intricate structure of the order, the hierarchy was rigorously enforced. Each rank possessed access to distinct layers of information. New recruits were privy only to the most fundamental directives: execute a task, without questions. Higher ranks might be informed of the target's name, location, and the precise method of execution. But only a select few, those intimately close to Hassan I-Sabbah, grasped the entirety of the grand scheme. These were the individuals empowered to authorize the assassination of a vizier or to revoke an order to kill a king. This meticulously layered system created an impenetrable bulwark of secrecy. If a Fidai was apprehended, torture proved futile, for they genuinely possessed no knowledge beyond their minuscule, assigned role. They constituted a single link in a vast chain, never its central nexus. Even the formidable Seljuk Empire, which dispatched spies into Alamut, ultimately failed. Some vanished without a trace. Others returned with vacant stares, utterly incapable of articulating what they had witnessed, or, perhaps, what they had not. No radios, no written correspondence. And yet, every assassin knew precisely when to act, where to proceed, and what specific action to undertake, as if guided by an inexplicable sixth sense. Some contemporary historians theorize that the assassins operated akin to a living organism, with each member acting independently yet responding to a shared, overarching consciousness. No one has ever conclusively proven this. But the very fact that the network endured for nearly 2 centuries without succumbing to annihilation is ample testament to its remarkable efficacy. And one more peculiar detail. No one ever defected. No one betrayed their trust. Not a single Fidei was ever captured and disclosed the Order's closely guarded secrets. Was this due to overwhelming fear? Or did they, even while imprisoned, genuinely believe that the Order maintained its vigilant watch over them? Perhaps. But perhaps it stemmed from something far more profound. Perhaps they genuinely believed in the cause they served. That death held greater significance than a life devoid of ideals. And that, ultimately, is what rendered the assassins virtually invincible. They did not merely vanish from the perception of their adversaries. They dissolved into the very minds of those who served them. Their enemies lacked a clear target, no centralized core to strike. Meanwhile, the assassins could strike anywhere, armed with nothing more than a silent glance and a dagger cunningly concealed within a sleeve. The embrace of death and a deeper philosophy. Among all the profound mysteries enveloping the assassin order, perhaps none shocked the outside world with greater intensity than this. The unwavering manner in which the Fidei embraced death as an intrinsic component of their mission, indeed, even viewing it as a distinct honor. They never sought personal reward. They never demanded safe passage. They exhibited no concern whatsoever for their own survival once the deed was accomplished. A single, decisive strike, one final, lingering glance. Then, they calmly accepted their execution, as if death itself were the sacred, concluding chapter of their life's intricately penned manuscript. Why would an individual conduct themselves in such a manner? The answer does not reside in the efficacy of their weapons or the rigor of their discipline. It lies deeply embedded within their profound faith and their philosophical convictions. The Fidei were not trained merely to kill. They were meticulously trained to comprehend the fundamental why behind their necessary acts of killing. And once that profound reason transcended the confines of the self, death no longer held any power to inspire fear. The Ismaili faith, adhered to by the assassins, diverged significantly from the mainstream Islam of the period. They believed in a concealed truth, meticulously transmitted through a sacred lineage of imams, spiritual successors entrusted with esoteric knowledge accessible to a select few. Hassan I Sabah was the torchbearer of this profound vision, and within the unyielding confines of Alamut Fortress, he constructed not merely a stronghold, but a veritable school of thought where knowledge, unwavering belief, and ultimate sacrifice converged to forge individuals who lived for a purpose far grander than their own lives. To the Fidei, the world was not merely a crucible of trials. It was a magnificent stage where every action carried significance transcending temporal boundaries. When they struck down a tyrant, they believed they were severing a link in a chain of oppression that had stretched across centuries. And when they perished, they believed they were not dissolving into oblivion, but rather returning to an eternal, luminous realm where all sacrifice was indelibly remembered and revered. Some historical accounts speak of Fidei spending entire nights in silent prayer before embarking on a mission, observing fasts, and purifying both their bodies and minds. They did not tremble. They did not rage, they did not plead. They simply advanced with serene resolve, as if they had already foreseen their fate and fully embraced it. To them, death was not an ultimate end. It was a passage to a higher plane of existence. Western legends, such as those propagated by Marco Polo, posited that the Fidei were introduced to a false paradise before their perilous missions, a garden overflowing with unimaginable pleasures, a tantalizing foretaste of the rewards awaiting those who remained steadfastly loyal and willingly sacrificed their lives. Whether this was literal truth or mere embellishment, it undeniably reflects the deeper reality. The profound conviction embedded within each man's heart was that this temporal world was not the ultimate destination, and that only through actions undertaken in the name of truth could one attain genuine liberation. This is precisely why the assassins never found it necessary to resort to threats or make overt promises. They inspired a belief so potent that it propelled men beyond their primal instincts for survival. And when an individual ceases to fear death, they transform into the most formidable adversary imaginable, not because of their inherent strength, but because no one can discern what they truly fear. For empires erected upon violence, vast wealth, and rigid hierarchies, the very existence of an organization sustained purely by unyielding will and profound faith was utterly inconceivable. How does one contend with an adversary who requires nothing but unwavering belief? How does one crush an individual who welcomes death for a sacred cause? This was the slow-burning nightmare that the assassins meticulously planted in the minds of their enemies. When rulers convened to deliberate affairs of state, their concerns extended beyond external threats emanating from beyond their borders. They whispered questions that no one dared to articulate aloud. Was there a Fidei within the court? Was someone among the royal guard simply biding their time? And if so, what recourse did they possess but to simply wait? When a lord or a religious dignitary was slain within his own residence, directly in front of his most trusted guards, and the perpetrator was revealed to be someone who had lived alongside him for years, the initial query was never, "Who did it?" It was always, "How long had he been here?" For the assassins, mere presence held less significance than impeccable timing. A Fidei could move with the stealth of a shadow, breathe with the silent fluidity of night, only to materialize once, and in that singular, fleeting moment, irrevocably alter the course of history. Masters of infiltration and psychological warfare, the Fidei were more than mere killers. They were consummate actors in a protracted, meticulously patient drama of conspiracy, one that frequently unfolded over years. They diligently mastered the enemy's language. They immersed themselves in local life, assuming disguises as merchants, scholars, servants, and even soldiers within the adversary's own army. They learned to think like the enemy. They became the enemy, and they waited. Some dedicated their entire youth simply to drawing one step closer to their intended target. One chilling account from that era recounts the tale of a Fidei who spent 13 years embedded within the Seljuk court. He ascended through the ranks, eventually becoming a trusted advisor, even commanding a fortress in the king's name. Then, one day, while sharing tea with his target in a tranquil study, he calmly reached into his sleeve and, with a single, swift motion, plunged a dagger into the man's heart. He then calmly resumed his seat, awaiting arrest, and smiled serenely at the approaching guards. This was no impulsive act. It was the culmination of over a decade of patient waiting, meticulous infiltration, and flawless performance. A role so thoroughly embodied that he may have blurred the lines between where the character ended and his true self began. He was not merely an assassin. He was an integral part of the very system he had come to dismantle, and that rendered him unstoppable from within. No fortress was too impregnable to defend against such a weapon. No army could ever be prepared for a betrayal that had been meticulously brewing for years. The assassins had no need to conquer in direct battles. Their victories were forged within the minds of their enemies. When anyone could be a killer, no one could be trusted. Kings harbored suspicions about their ministers. Generals doubted the loyalty of their men. Fathers questioned their own sons. And in that precipitous collapse of trust, the assassins had no need to strike again. the world began to tear itself apart in the grip of fear. These infiltrations were not always solely aimed at assassination. Some Fidei are believed to have penetrated other religions, immersing themselves in their doctrines, participating in their rituals, and even delivering sermons. Their purpose was not to kill, but to observe, to transmit messages, or to subtly implant ideological seeds that would later sow confusion, division, or distraction. One scholar recounted debating a devout Muslim cleric, only to discover years later that the man had been a Fidei in disguise. So, how does one navigate two lives in two opposing worlds without succumbing to mental fragmentation? The answer lies in a concept we have previously encountered: absolute, unyielding belief. When every action is perceived as an integral part of a grand design, one can assume any identity, become anything, as long as the mission's fulfillment remains paramount. The assassins did not require a vast army of men, they needed only one. A dagger positioned in the precise place at the opportune moment, wielded by someone whom no one would ever suspect. And that was sufficient to shake an empire to its very core. This is why royal courts lived in perpetual disquiet. They could not discern who among them was truly genuine, who would strike, or who would smile as blood stained the marble floors. No one could vanquish a force that employed patience as its weapon and faith as its impenetrable armor. No one could ever be truly certain. Was the guard at the palace gate today a killer who had waited for 9 years? Was the servant pouring wine trained to slit throats since the tender age of 16? These were the questions without answers. And that was the assassin's most quiet, most perfect victory, a victory achieved without armies, without battles, without war. The Crusades and the shadow of Alamat. To the Western perspective, the Crusades were perceived as a holy war, a divine mandate to reclaim the sacred Holy Land from Muslim dominion. But in the stark reality of the early 12th century Middle East, it was a period of incessant bloodshed, pervasive betrayal, and utter chaos. The Islamic kingdoms were fractured and disunited. The Christian Crusader states constantly shifted their allegiances, engaging in cycles of conquest, betrayal, and reconquest. And amidst this maelstrom of violence, there existed a small, enigmatic force. They possessed no flag, no army, and harbored no territorial ambitions. Yet they were feared by both warring factions, the assassins. Initially, the West failed to comprehend them. To the Crusaders, the sole enemy was Islam. But then, abruptly, some of their own prominent leaders were assassinated without any discernible cause. Without engaging in battle. Not on the battlefield, but in the bustling streets, at joyous weddings, or while quietly dining. The perpetrators were not ordinary Muslim soldiers. They were strangers, indistinguishable from locals, fluent in the native tongue, and always carrying a solitary dagger. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat stands as one of the clearest examples. He was among the most influential figures of the Crusades, elected king of Jerusalem mere days before his murder. 2 men approached him in the street and fatally stabbed him amidst the marketplace. They were apprehended almost immediately but displayed no fear, no remorse. Before their execution, one of them smiled and whispered a phrase in an unknown tongue. No one understood its meaning, but no one ever forgot it. Once again, the name, Alamat, was uttered, imbued with a mixture of confusion and profound fear. What truly terrified the Christian kingdoms was not merely the audacity of the assassinations, but the baffling lack of clear motive. Why would a Muslim order deliberately kill a potential ally? The answer lies at the very core of the assassin philosophy. They were indifferent to whether an individual was Christian or Muslim. Their sole concern was who threatened their sacred ideal. The Crusades presented fertile ground for the assassins to operate. While both Christian and Muslim factions engaged in rampant slaughter and plunder, the assassins meticulously maintained a fragile balance. Sometimes through calculated murder, at other times through discreet negotiations. Records suggest that certain Crusader leaders even dispatched envoys to Alamat, ostensibly seeking protection, a thinly veiled offering of tribute in exchange for peace. This inherent ambiguity rendered the assassins impossible to ignore and equally impossible to eliminate. They had no need for a massive army to exert influence. With merely a handful of strategic deaths at the precise time and location, they possessed the power to fundamentally alter the political landscape of the entire Levant. Some Christian lords attempted to exploit them as tools, but swiftly discovered that no one could control the men of Alamat. They were not subservient to gold. They were impervious to threats. They moved to the rhythm of a logic utterly incomprehensible to any outsider. A legend recounts that King Richard the Lionheart once sent a message to Hassan I-Sabah, imploring him to cease targeting his troops. Hassan did not reply with a letter. He responded with a stark gesture, a dagger placed beside the envoy's bed. Attached was a chilling note. "If I wished it, this would be in your heart." No one can confirm the veracity of this story, but the mere rumor was enough to keep English soldiers sleepless through the night, trembling amidst the desert's profound silence. What rendered the assassins truly terrifying was this: they had no need to kill many to instill terror in thousands. A few meticulously chosen deaths sufficed, because no one knew who would be next. No one knew the killer's whereabouts. And no one could be certain if someone within their own army secretly served Alamat. In a holy war where every side believed they carried the divine light, the assassins emerged as the elusive shadow that belonged to no one. They did not incinerate churches. They did not demolish mosques. They sought neither land nor preached salvation. They simply dispatched the right person at the opportune moment, and then vanished. That is why they were not annihilated during the Crusades. No faction was sufficiently united to openly confront them. No ruler dared to face them head-on. And long after the Crusades receded into the annals of history, the assassins endured, a silent, invisible third force, not numerically strong, yet impossible to erase. The unseen hand, women in the order. History, as is often its wont, tends to commemorate those who brandished swords. The names of women are conspicuously absent. No female assassins are mentioned by name. No prominent women appear in tales of daring missions. But this conspicuous absence does not imply their non-existence. On the contrary, they constituted the invisible force that endowed the organization with its enduring strength. Within the impenetrable confines of Alamat Fortress, a place no outsider ever breached, women played quiet yet profoundly crucial roles. While they did not typically carry out the assassinations, they nurtured, cared for, educated, and even trained the Fidai. Later documents, unearthed in clandestine archives, revealed that many women within the Ismaili community possessed profound knowledge of medicine, herbs, and antidotes, skills essential for preparing the assassins for their perilous missions. In an organization predicated on absolute secrecy, the individual least suspected frequently wields the greatest power. One legend speaks of a Fidai who reached her target by posing as a newly wedded wife, living with the man for months until the opportune day when she struck. No one suspected a woman. No one imagined that those gentle eyes could conceal a death sentence. And that, precisely, was her most potent weapon, weakness perfectly performed. Ancient writings even allude to keepers of the library at Alamat, believed to be highly educated women tasked with meticulously preserving secret knowledge, intricate maps, complex codes, and religious texts layered with concealed meanings. They were the guardians of the flame, ensuring that the core ideals of the order would persist, regardless of how many times enemies attempted to extinguish them. There is even a legend of a woman who served as a trusted advisor to Hassan I-Sabah himself. So profound was his trust, in fact, that he reportedly entrusted her with decision-making during his final years of spiritual retreat. While no conclusive historical proof survives, her presence resonates in multiple oral traditions under various names, yet always embodying the same indelible image, a woman who did not wield the dagger, but who held the power to choose who would. History often portrays medieval women as confined to kitchens, harems, or chapels, But within the assassin order, they could be messengers, trainers, codebreakers, and perhaps even the silent architects of a king's demise, without ever physically lifting a weapon. They did not seek overt attention. They existed as an integral part of the hidden framework, the very spine in the shadows. Remarkably, women within the assassin order were not treated as mere property, as was often the case in many other societies of the time. They were granted access to knowledge, trained in critical thought, and entrusted with profound secrets. This radical departure from conventional gender roles allowed the order to maintain its flexibility and remain hidden for nearly 2 centuries. Because when no one suspects a woman, she becomes the unseen link that holds everything seamlessly together. To this very day, descendants of the Ismaili tradition continue to emphasize the women's role as essential to the community's enduring strength. They do not celebrate individual names, but they steadfastly adhere to one truth: in the enveloping darkness, nothing can endure without the hand that keeps the flame perpetually alive. And perhaps in those quiet years, when Fidai were dispatched into the world to kill in profound silence, there were also women, nameless, faceless, who sent them forth, who meticulously prepared every single step, and who waited, knowing full well that they would never return. Their sacrifice was never formally documented, but it is etched deeply into the very soul of the order, a soul that even now, history has yet to fully acknowledge. Alamut, a fortress of thought. Alamut was never history's largest fortress. It lacked deep moats, towering walls bristling with cannons, or garrisons numbering in the thousands, unlike the grand castles of medieval Europe. And yet, remarkably, every army that ever laid siege to it ultimately failed. Not due to overwhelming defensive force, but because they never truly comprehended the essence of Alamut. Perched precariously amidst Persia's Alborz mountains, Alamut resembled a crack between heaven and earth. Only one narrow, treacherous trail led to its main gate, and only those granted permission ever discovered the true path. The terrain was so formidable that even an army of thousands could be halted by a handful of concealed archers positioned high above. But it was not merely its defensive capabilities that made Alamut so terrifying. Inside the fortress, according to the rare accounts of Muslim historians who traversed the region, existed an entirely different world, a realm of profound philosophy, rigorous discipline, and unyielding spiritual devotion. Thick stone walls, labyrinthine corridors, secret chambers linked by narrow passageways, all seemingly designed not merely to safeguard information, but to fundamentally reshape the human mind. This was not a mere hiding place, but a transformative crucible designed to mold individuals into instruments of a timeless ideal. There were no prisons, no torture chambers, but there was an intellectual control, both harsh and exacting. No one within Alamut possessed the entirety of the truth. Each individual knew only their assigned task, interacted selectively, learned only what was strictly necessary, and held the conviction that should death arrive, it would carry a profound meaning beyond the grasp of mortal comprehension. The Library of Alamut, according to ancient sources, contained not only multiple copies of the Quran, but also texts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, Greek philosophy, and the writings of Indian scholars. This transcended being merely a base for assassinations. It was a quiet epicenter of knowledge, where learning was meticulously preserved and repurposed in service of a goal that few would ever fully grasp. Scholars within Alamut did not merely engage in theological debates. They meticulously dissected it. They analyzed faith not as sacred dogma, but as a potent tool of ideology. The Fidai were not indoctrinated with blind belief, but were trained to understand why faith could lead to radical action, and, more importantly, why death could be embraced if it served a confirmed truth. What allowed Alamut to stand defiantly for nearly 2 centuries was not solely its stone walls, but the profound fear it instilled in those beyond them. No one knew what transpired within. No one knew who resided there, who received training there, or who was meticulously planning the next assassination. There were no banners, no signals, no declarations of war. Only silence. The kind of silence that stretches ominously over mountains, patiently awaiting to engulf anyone who dared to break its stillness. Although besieged many times, Alamut never succumbed to external forces. Those who came close often retreated, plagued by doubt. Some who attempted to scale its perilous slopes were shot down without a trace. And those who entered uninvited frequently vanished entirely, their bodies never to be found. It was not death that terrified people most, it was the chilling prospect of being erased. To be utterly forgotten, to vanish from history itself. And Alamut understood this profound fear better than anyone. Facing the unseen enemy. Empires and the assassins. When an empire ascends to the zenith of its power, it begins to harbor the conviction that everything lies within its grasp. Armies, immense wealth, rigid laws. Even destiny itself. But those who confronted the assassin order learned a far more terrifying truth. The most devastating form of defeat is not simply losing. It is not knowing what you are truly fighting. Medieval empires were adept at engaging in warfare with cavalry, arrows, impenetrable stone walls, and the raw brutality of spilled blood. But when your adversary is an idea, clad in humble robes, concealing a dagger within his sleeve, no conventional strategy can possibly prepare you. The primary and most direct adversary of the assassins was the Seljuk Empire, a formidable Islamic dynasty that encompassed the majority of Persia and Central Asia in the 11th century. The Seljuks possessed a robust bureaucracy, elite armies, and a court whose pervasive influence stretched from Baghdad to the Syrian coast. To them, the assassins were nothing short of heretics. A perilous seed of rebellion that demanded immediate eradication. The powerful Vizier Nizam al-Mulk once famously declared, "A tree cannot survive with worms in its roots," viewing the Ismailis as precisely that destructive worm. But fate, in its cruel irony, had other plans. Nizam himself became the inaugural victim, stabbed by a Fidai during a pilgrimage. Surrounded by his personal guards, he was felled by a solitary dagger. His death shattered Seljuk politics and sent an unequivocal message: when the worm learns to wield a blade, the entire tree trembles. Next came Sultan Malik Shah, who had once vowed to obliterate Alamut from the map. He died suddenly, mere months after Nizam. No conclusive proof ever directly linked the assassins, but from that day forward, fear supplanted aggressive action. The fervent desire to dismantle the order faded, replaced by hushed whispers and profound hesitation. Even the leaders of the Crusades were not spared their silent wrath. As previously noted, Conrad of Montferrat, newly elected king of Jerusalem, was stabbed in broad daylight by two enigmatic strangers. No one comprehended why. A Muslim group eliminating a Christian leader compelled everyone to question: were the assassins enemies or allies? And that very confusion proved to be their deadliest strike. For when no one knows whether to engage in combat or to negotiate with the individual who might already be pressing a blade to your throat, paralysis ensues. But the most relentless adversary, and the one that ultimately led to the assassin's ruin, was the Mongol Empire. The Mongols harbored no reverence for religion. They feared no god. They did not engage in negotiation. As they swept westward, indiscriminately burning Baghdad, incinerating libraries, and slaughtering millions, they set their sights firmly on Alamut. They understood that to control Persia, they had to dismantle the assassins' invisible network. First, Hulagu Khan, the formidable grandson of Genghis Khan, personally spearheaded the invasion into the Alborz Mountains. Unlike other empires that relied on protracted sieges or subtle diplomacy, Hulagu brought with him the unparalleled siegecraft of the Mongols. He besieged Alamut for months. And for the first time in nearly 2 centuries, the assassins confronted an adversary for which they were utterly unprepared, an enemy who feared nothing. Not death, not negotiation. Not even their profound silence. In the end, Alamut fell, not in a blaze of glory or a defiant act of resistance, but in a profound silence. Those who remained burned the library, destroyed the archives, and meticulously erased all traces. When the Mongols finally entered the fortress, they discovered an empty shell, like a riddle without an answer. No leaders were captured, no treasures unearthed, no ideology definitively uncovered, merely scorched walls and defaced symbols. As if history itself was deliberately attempting to conceal what had once thrived there. And yet, though Alamut crumbled and the assassins ostensibly disbanded, their legacy was not destroyed. No army, regardless of its brutality, can truly extinguish an idea. And the assassins, though no longer a state, no longer confined within a fortress, lived on in hushed whispers, in inexplicable assassinations, in secrets buried beneath the ashes of fallen empires. Their enemies believed they had achieved ultimate victory. But if one listens intently on a quiet night, somewhere amidst the Persian hills, you might still perceive it. The faint sound of a dagger being unsheathed, soft as a breath. The unseen strength, resilience in failure. No organization is flawless. Even the most adept assassins. Even plans meticulously crafted over months, sometimes even years, occasionally faltered. But for the assassins, failure was never the ultimate end. On the contrary, it served as potent fuel, a whetstone for their most perilous, invisible weapon, patience. History seldom records failed assassinations, partly due to the ensuing shame, partly because few, if any, survived to narrate the tale. But scattered across Islamic chronicles, crusader journals, and enduring folk legends, there persist whispers of knives miraculously deflected at the last possible second, of agents apprehended before they could strike, of intricate plots uncovered at the 11th hour. One of the most renowned failures was the attempted assassination of Saladin, the legendary Muslim leader who unified Egypt and Syria to stand against the Crusaders. For years, Saladin had waged relentless campaigns against the assassins, besieging their fortresses and relentlessly calling for their total annihilation. But one night, deep within his own encampment, a Fidai, expertly disguised as a humble servant, stealthily approached his bedside. He would have struck, but a guard, who had inexplicably switched shifts earlier than anticipated, apprehended him. The assassin was swiftly subdued and executed on the spot. Saladin survived the attempt, but from that night onward, he never slept without a guard stationed beside his bed. Crucially, he also never again ordered the assassin's destruction. Instead, there was a profound silence. Perhaps a discreet letter, perhaps a symbolic gift, or simply an unspoken understanding between two formidable powers that recognized their mutual inability to utterly destroy the other. In that sense, the Fidai had, after all, succeeded. Not in taking a life, but in implanting an indelible warning directly into the heart of one of the most powerful men alive. Another documented case in Damascus involved a prominent judge who routinely condemned the Ismailis in his public sermons, vehemently advocating for their complete eradication. A Fidai meticulously infiltrated his lectures, posing as a quiet, unassuming student for months. On the chosen day, as he prepared to act, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but because he realized the judge was more heavily guarded than anticipated. He withdrew, leaving no trace, a rare decision. But weeks later, a different team arrived. This time, the mission was successfully completed. That is the crucial lesson. The assassins were not driven by raw emotion or personal vengeance. They were a meticulously calibrated machine of logic, prepared to delay, retreat, and adapt as circumstances dictated. Failure was not met with punishment. No one was executed for failing to achieve a kill. Instead, failures were rigorously studied. Much like surveying new terrain, every mistake became a detailed map of the enemy's weaknesses, meticulously recorded and committed to memory. Sometimes it was not the assassins who faltered. It was the victims who outmaneuvered them. There was once a lord who constantly altered his routines. No fixed meal times, no predictable sleeping chambers, no nocturnal visitors. He consumed only food prepared by his blood relatives. One day, he noticed a man within a group of pilgrims, observing, trailing him for 4 consecutive days. He had the man seized. Before he could utter a single word, the Fidai bit down on a capsule of poison sewn into his robe and died instantly, without a sound. No one was killed that day. But the mere attempt profoundly impacted the city. Gates closed earlier, troop deployments doubled, every traveler was meticulously scrutinized. No life was taken. But the fear was perfectly instilled. And that was what the assassins grasped better than anyone. It is not death itself, but the agonizing anticipation of death that constitutes the true weapon. Used correctly, failure could resonate with greater impact than success. A missed strike might not claim a single life, but it could deprive a kingdom of restful sleep for years to come. The unending echo, the assassin's enduring legacy. History records the fall of Alamut in the year 1256, at the hands of the Mongol army led by Hulagu Khan. It was a devastating blow. A ruthless incision into the very heart of the assassin order. But the peculiar aspect of this event is this: after the strike, there were no ashes, no bodies, no captured leaders. No grand libraries seized, no treasures discovered. It was as if the very people who had inhabited that formidable fortress had simply vanished from history itself. Mere days before the invaders arrived. What remained were broken walls, shattered symbols, and strange markings etched into stone, as if someone had deliberately erased every trace. Protecting something far more sacred than life itself. Did the assassins choose to destroy themselves before their enemies could achieve it? No one truly knows. But after 1256, the name assassin disappeared from public life. No more killings, no more ominous warnings, no more messages clandestinely hidden in the shadows. The other fortresses within their network were gradually abandoned or repurposed. Those who survived scattered amongst the general populace. No one could definitively say if they were still alive, or if they had chosen to vanish forever. Some theorists speculate that a handful of them survived, reforming into clandestine societies that continued to transmit their teachings in a quieter, more adaptable form, no longer bound by armies or traditional religious structures. Some may have sought refuge in remote mountain communities, living as ordinary people, yet still safeguarding secret rituals, not to kill, but to keep a sacred flame alive. Others whisper that a few Fidai were dispatched on missions and never recalled. Not because they failed, but because no one summoned them home. And so, they lived on, observing, seamlessly blending into distant lands, still upholding a philosophy no outsider could ever truly comprehend. Perhaps they embraced other faiths, even subtly infiltrated modern governments, not to assassinate, but to guard the ultimate secret of the assassins, why they ever existed at all. From the 14th century onward, the organization was no longer formally known as the Assassins, but in the tranquil northern hills of Iran. A quiet branch of the Ismaili community continues to exist to this very day. They live peacefully, unarmed, devoid of vengeance, yet they carry with them a centuries-old tradition. A structured body of knowledge, oral texts passed from memory to memory, and one unbreakable rule: never allow outsiders to fully comprehend. And perhaps that is the true key to their survival. They did not perish, they transformed. When the world shifted, they adapted. When their name was erased, they assumed new identities. When darkness was hunted, they learned to exist in the light in ways no one could truly perceive. No more daggers, no more impregnable gates. But the fundamental principles endure, quietly resting within the subterranean currents of history. Perhaps the assassins are genuinely gone. Or perhaps they are simply silent. And if they do indeed still exist, the profound lesson they bequeathed is not found in the blood they spilled, but in something far more chilling: how a small, stateless group with no army, armed solely with the profound knowledge of fear and unwavering faith, could bend the very course of history for over 2 centuries. And if you believe it is all over, ask yourself this: Why is it that even today, the word assassin still sends shivers down our spines? Even when no one remains to kill? History frequently neglects the vanquished, the smaller armies. The fringe ideologies, those not sanctioned by kings or meticulously inscribed into official records. And yet, occasionally, it is precisely those relegated to the periphery of the page who endure the longest. The assassin order is one such legacy. A narrative not typically found in textbooks, yet vibrantly alive in collective memory, in potent symbols, in human imagination, and in the whispered folklore of humankind. After vanishing from conventional political history, the name, assassin, did not fade into oblivion. On the contrary, its dissemination became stranger, more adaptable, more eternal than ever before. From the 14th century onward, writers, historians, and itinerant storytellers began to speak of the assassins not as a mere organization, but as a potent symbol of profound mystery, of absolute loyalty, of an unseen order that no one fully comprehended. In Europe, the term assassin gradually evolved into a general designation for anyone who killed with a deliberate purpose, irrespective of their religion or origin. And even though the term was simplified, the unsettling shadow behind it remained unchanged: a person who kills not for monetary gain, but for an unwavering belief. And that, precisely, is why the word carries such enduring weight across time. From history to myth, the assassin's enduring image. In medieval literature, particularly in ancient French, Italian, and Latin manuscripts, the assassins were depicted as custodians of arcane knowledge, residing in towering mountain fortresses, moving with the speed of lightning, and vanishing like morning mist. They were not merely labeled as killers. They were described as the minds in shadow, guardians of secrets that the world was never meant to uncover. Western travelers, such as the renowned Marco Polo, contributed to this pervasive mystique. In his accounts, he spoke of a false paradise where assassins were reportedly shown unimaginable pleasures, promised their return if they perished for their sacred cause. Historians today question the literal truth of this fantastical tale. But in the realm of myth, uncertainty only amplifies the narrative's power. Legends of the assassins continued to permeate poetry, theater, and even religious discourse, each adding its own distinct layer of interpretation. In some Muslim communities, they were viewed as heretics, yet spoken of in hushed tones as men who lived for something greater than themselves. In Europe, they became inextricably linked to secret societies, the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, even the enigmatic Illuminati, as if every mysterious group that emerged was somehow their direct descendant. In the modern world, the assassin has ascended to the status of a global icon. They appear in films, novels, and most notably in video games, with Assassin's Creed serving as the most prominent example. In these portrayals, they are reimagined as valiant warriors of freedom, battling against a hidden world order. While imbued with fictional elements, the core essence remains intact: the conviction that a single individual, acting with unwavering conviction and impeccable timing, possesses the power to alter the course of history. And perhaps what draws us inexorably to them is not the inherent violence, but their unyielding resolve. Not the glint of their blades, but the profound idea that even in a world governed by intricate systems and pervasive surveillance, someone might still choose to dwell in the shadows to safeguard the last sliver of light. The legacy of the assassins is not merely a chronicle of deaths. It is a pervasive sensation that something is perpetually unfolding behind our backs, in profound silence, with enduring patience, never overtly seen, yet never truly gone. And that, precisely, is why we remember them. Not as a mere organization, but as a powerful symbol of what human beings can achieve when they believe in something far greater than themselves. The unwritten code. Rituals and communication. No clandestine organization can endure for long without its own intricate system of rituals. These are essential not merely for communication, but to cultivate a sacred demarcation between those within the inner circle and those perpetually relegated to the outside. For the assassins, these rituals transcended mere religious ceremonies. They constituted a meticulously coded language, a means to meticulously conceal information and to rigorously discipline the soul. And the most chilling truth of all is that nearly everything we believe we know about them remains pure speculation. The Fidei, those who solemnly pledged to embrace death for their sacred cause, did not merely join with a simple oath. They underwent a closed, arduous, almost mystical process. Fragmented accounts describe new initiates being kept in profound isolation for weeks, utterly severed from the external world, exposed only to cryptic sermons, perhaps drawn from scripture, perhaps from profound philosophy, or perhaps from something that seamlessly fused the two. Nothing was ever committed to writing. Knowledge was meticulously transmitted through ritual and intricate symbolism. As if the only authentic path to comprehending truth was to experience it firsthand. Symbols formed the very essence of the assassin order. Every carving, every meticulously folded slip of paper, every object deliberately misplaced, carried a profound, coded meaning. One tale recounts a Fidei being summoned not with a verbal message, not with a spoken word, but with a solitary olive branch adorned with a black thread, left discreetly on his doorstep. He saw it, understood its unspoken command, and vanished into the night. That was the language of command, articulated in profound silence. Even the very architecture of Alamut was said to be deeply symbolic. Some corridors led to dead ends. Certain staircases inexplicably turned the wrong way in the enveloping darkness. Rooms were ingeniously designed so that a mere whisper could carry to a distant location. To navigate this intricate space, one had to be awakened, to perceive the environment with eyes that no outsider could ever develop. Unusual traditions were also observed. Before an assassination, a Fidei did not simply depart. He performed a private rite, reciting an ancient verse, pressing his lips to a carved stone, or lighting a candle and extinguishing it in profound silence. Each individual possessed his own unique method, but all converged upon one fundamental belief: they never acted in isolation. They were an intrinsic part of something immeasurably larger, something eternal. Even their spoken language was encoded. A seemingly innocuous greeting might not signify a simple hello. A casual question could, in reality, be an explicit order to kill. A parable might contain a hidden location, a specific date, a crucial name. This is precisely why outsiders never deciphered their true communication methods, because their spoken words were merely the surface manifestation of a shared, collective experience. Modern scholars propose that the assassins developed a kind of sacred language, never committed to writing, never formally taught, but indelibly etched into the mind through relentless repetition and ritualistic practice. Once assimilated, a member could traverse anywhere, hear any seemingly mundane phrase, and instantly comprehend what needed to be done, without ever being explicitly told. And remarkably, those potent symbols did not perish when the order eventually fell. They began to surface faintly in Middle Eastern architecture, in the handwritten manuscripts of European secret societies, even in faded frescoes adorning ancient monasteries in Italy and Spain. Were these the residual remnants of the order, or merely the quiet migration of an idea, passed from soul to soul, from one era to another, without ever necessitating a name? What we know with absolute certainty is this: no outsider ever fully grasped the assassin system of symbols. No historian has successfully decoded a complete ritual. And that is precisely why the assassins were never fully unmasked, because they never committed to writing what mattered most. They lived it. They died with it. They transmitted it with a fleeting glance, a whispered breath, a subtle gesture. When one comprehends that ritual was not designed to conceal truth from others, but to constantly remind the faithful of their true identity, one begins to understand why the order did not crumble alongside its fortress walls. For within those enigmatic symbols, they meticulously preserved their essence, and that essence may still persist, even if no one remains to speak its name aloud. The philosophy of the blade and the reader's quest. When we contemplate the daggers, the shocking assassinations, and the sudden demises met with calm, unwavering eyes, it is effortless to label them simply as killers. But to halt there is to profoundly miss the most crucial truth. The assassins did not act like mere mercenaries. They moved with profound purpose, with spiritual intent, with rational conviction, and an enduring mystery that remains stubbornly unsolved. The philosophy they adhered to was inextricably linked to the tenets of the Ismaili faith, a branch of Shia Islam that posited truth did not reside solely in overt words, but in the hidden meanings layered beneath language and profound symbolism. To them, the Quran was not merely a book of law, it was a cipher, a meticulously designed map pointing towards a higher reality, one that only those who had undergone an awakening could truly decipher. And those who had awakened believed it was their sacred duty to maintain equilibrium in the world, no matter the cost. For the assassins, killing was not an act of rebellion. It was a corrective gesture, a necessary incision to realign the world when it veered off its intended course. To them, a tyrannical king, a hate-mongering cleric, a corrupt judge were not simply adversaries, but misaligned links in the intricate wheel of history. And their sacred mission was to sever those links, thereby preventing the wheel from crushing everyone beneath its relentless turning. Outsiders perceived only death, but insiders witnessed the restoration of order. Not everyone was a designated target. Only those believed to bring destruction upon the world if allowed to persist. Many, Fidai, acted without direct orders. They intuitively sensed the imbalance. They comprehended the underlying logic, and they moved with an almost primal instinct, as if they were individual cells within a greater mind that had no need for verbal communication. Ancient texts allude to assassins engaging in meditation, reciting scripture, or profound philosophical reflection before embarking on a mission. They did not kill in anger. They acted with profound clarity, as if performing a sacred rite, not a common crime. And that, more than anything, is what truly terrified the rulers of the age. The man who kills a king is not merely a criminal. He is someone who genuinely believes he is saving the world. This profound belief was not born of bloodshed, but of books. Alamut was not solely a training ground. It was a veritable school of thought where individuals delved into Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, Babylonian astronomy, and even banned religious texts. Within those unyielding stone walls, they engaged in intense debates concerning free will, the intrinsic nature of power, and the fluctuating limits of morality. And from these profound deliberations emerged a terrifying conclusion: in a world succumbing to decay, to eliminate one person might paradoxically be the most moral act imaginable. Not everyone can grasp such a concept. Fewer still can accept it. But that is precisely why the Fidai could embrace death without a moment's hesitation. They did not seek earthly reward. They did not anticipate a preordained paradise. They simply believed that performing what was inherently right, even if misunderstood, even if cursed by all, even if utterly erased from memory, must still be accomplished. And that is what set the assassins apart from every other group in the annals of history. Today, some label them as criminals. Some hail them as warriors. Others view them as extreme philosophers. But regardless of the name we ascribe to them, they leave behind one unanswered question that continues to haunt us: if an individual perceives evil approaching with undeniable clarity, and possesses a singular opportunity to halt its advance, should they act? The assassins never sought a definitive answer. They simply acted, leaving behind a profound pause in history that never truly dissipates. Amidst all the narratives of daggers concealed in sleeves, of killings that no one anticipated, and of mountaintop fortresses shrouded in an eternal mist, there exists one truth rarely spoken, yet perhaps more significant than all the rest. The assassins were, above all else, diligent readers. It was no mere coincidence that the most sacred place within Alamut was not the armory, nor the prison, but the library. There, in the soft, flickering glow of oil lamps and the chilling hush of stone corridors, hundreds of sacred texts, intricate maps, ancient scrolls, and profound philosophical manuscripts were meticulously copied, painstakingly preserved, and deeply memorized. According to fragmented records, the founder of the order, Hassan I-Sabbah, dedicated hours each day not to training assassins in the art of killing, but to instructing them in how to comprehend the world itself. To him, the blade was merely the eventual outcome. The true impetus resided in how one perceived justice, power, and ultimate truth. Assassins trained at Alamut did not simply learn to move silently or to strike within bustling crowds. They delved into Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and texts explicitly forbidden by the dominant religious authorities of their era. They studied Aristotle. They learned to meticulously dissect language, and most importantly, they were rigorously trained to challenge their teachers, to question everything. From this unique environment emerged a generation of Fidai who were not mindless weapons, but rational actors, philosophers of decisive action. Each assassination was not a blind command. It was the culminating point of rigorous debate, meticulous analysis, and profound moral deliberation. They firmly believed that only by truly comprehending the inherent value of a human life did one earn the right to take one. The Alamut Library was reputed to be a unique sanctuary of knowledge in the entire medieval world. It housed not only Islamic texts, but also Jewish, Christian, Persian, and even Egyptian writings. In an age when most individuals burned what they feared, the assassins meticulously collected, translated, and protected knowledge. Not to boast, but because they believed it represented the most silent, most enduring form of power. This made them adversaries on all sides. They were despised by religious authorities for safeguarding heretical knowledge, and feared by kings for utilizing profound thought to subtly manipulate politics. An assassin could be killed, but an idea, a reinterpreted verse, an unanswered question, could outlive entire empires. Some Fidai were dispatched not to kill, but to engage in profound debate. They journeyed to distant lands, posing as esteemed scholars, and subtly undermined rigid belief systems with gentle, unanswerable questions. They did not preach. They did not incite rebellion. They simply planted seeds of doubt. And in numerous instances, that was sufficient to cause a structure to collapse long before any blood was spilled. Today, the majority of Alamut's library is lost, either consumed by fire or vanished into the mists of history. But fragments have miraculously surfaced in European monasteries, in ancient archives across Syria, Egypt, and Persia. They bear no explicit assassin's seal, but in their distinctive method of interpretation, their profound depth of language, their meticulous precision of logic, a familiar presence lingers, like an invisible signature. Yes, the assassins did kill, but more significantly, they remained awake through the night, immersed in reading, engaged in debate, seeking to comprehend why the act of killing should ever hold meaning. And if there is one characteristic that truly distinguishes them from every other force of death in history, it is this. They believed that intellect was not merely a tool for living well, but the sole pathway to dying with honor. The assassin in the modern mind. Perhaps the assassin order faded from official historical records in the 13th century. Yet, remarkably, the further they recede in time, the more distinct their silhouette becomes in the public imagination. No longer present on any geographical map, absent from detailed war reports, they now exist vibrantly in books, in films, and most vividly within our collective imagination. They embody a symbol that no one fully comprehends, yet everyone senses is somehow still present. It was in the West that the image of the assassins first underwent a romanticized transformation. By the 14th and 15th centuries, French, Italian, and Latin manuscripts began to portray them not merely as killers, but as Knights of the Shadows. They were depicted as enlightened individuals who operated outside the confines of the law in service of a higher truth. They were no longer branded as heretics. They were intellectual warriors, fighting not for fleeting glory, but to safeguard what had been buried, the profound truth. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as Europe plunged into the Age of Enlightenment and subsequently the Industrial Revolution, the name, assassin, reemerged, not within academic history books, but within literature and political discourse. In a world beginning to challenge entrenched religious beliefs, defy state authority, and confront established power structures, the assassins transmuted into a powerful metaphor for those willing to stand alone in the darkness against oppressive systems. Poets, romantic philosophers, and even revolutionaries appropriated the image of the assassin to give voice to rebels with profound ideals. Those who fought not for personal gain, but for a more equitable order, even if the ultimate cost was their very life. And in that imaginative reinterpretation, the hunted became a compelling voice for those who possessed none. In the 20th century, film and television injected new vitality into the symbol. Masked figures engaging in combat within the shadows, guided by personal codes that rendered them unaccountable to any external authority. These characters all echoed the essence of the assassin. They were not always explicitly named, but in narratives such as V for Vendetta, The Matrix, or any tale revolving around spies and rogue hackers, the spirit of the assassin became a silent blueprint for modern resistance. Then came the globally renowned video game, Assassin's Creed, and with it, the image was catapulted into worldwide consciousness. While heavily imbued with fictional elements, the game faithfully retained the core essence. The assassin stands between two worlds, neither hero nor villain, but an individual who acts to safeguard human freedom from the pervasive grip of absolute control. Players were not merely controlling a killer. They stepped into the role of a person confronting a hidden order that observed and governed everything. The message resonated deeply, and it did so because it mirrored something profound and inherently modern, the unsettling sensation that we are constantly observed, managed, and silently yearning for escape, for a pathway back to our most authentic selves. And perhaps that is why the image of the assassin never truly fades. In every era where power becomes overly absolute, when law ceases to safeguard justice, when the weak are silenced, people remember the faceless silhouettes in the dark, the glint of blades in the night, and those who dared to die not for themselves, but to restore equilibrium to history. Today, the assassin is no longer merely a historical event. They are a pervasive feeling. The feeling that no matter how tight the world's grip becomes, someone is still watching, still waiting, not to kill, but to awaken. The elusive truth, an ongoing mystery. As the world transitioned into the modern age, historians began to delve into the hazy, often overlooked corners of Middle Eastern history. And almost immediately, they encountered a peculiar obstacle, a striking paucity of direct evidence. What we currently understand about the assassins largely derives from the accounts of their adversaries, Islamic historians, Crusader chronicles, and Western travelers like Marco Polo. But in all these diverse sources, truth and legend intertwined inextricably, like swirling sand and enveloping mist. No internal documents have survived. The fabled library of Alamut was either consumed by fire or meticulously hidden before the Mongols launched their assault. The Fidai left no personal memoirs. Symbols meticulously etched into stone were deliberately chiseled away. Hallways within Alamut led to nowhere. They left behind no concrete history, only a profound absence. And in that haunting absence, generations have been inexorably drawn in, as if the less we know, the more intensely we crave knowledge. Archaeologists embarked on expeditions to meticulously comb the Alborz Mountains, striving to pinpoint the precise locations of assassin strongholds. Some traces were indeed discovered. Foundations, pottery shards, fragments of stone walls weathered by the relentless passage of time. But nothing conclusive. No weapons, no maps, no names, and most notably, no discernible trace of their philosophical doctrines. Scattered manuscripts surfaced in ancient libraries across Syria, Iran, Egypt, and even Europe. But none of them directly address the organization's intricate structure. They contain only abstract philosophy, deeply symbolic poetry, and concepts that seamlessly blur the lines between religion and metaphysics. And so, scholars find themselves in a peculiar predicament. They can read the words, but they cannot truly decipher their meaning. Some Western historians in the 19th and 20th centuries even raised doubts as to whether the assassins truly existed. Perhaps their notoriety was exaggerated, perhaps they were merely a small group inflated by medieval mythmaking. But that theory, too, was challenged by the very silence that surrounded them. For if the assassins were simply a legend, why did so many powerful empires dispatch letters pleading for peace? Why did Crusader kings augment their personal guards? Why did the Mongols deploy an entire army specifically to destroy them? A mere ghost does not provoke such tangible, real-world reactions. In the 21st century, new endeavors have emerged from historians and cryptographers alike, striving to decode the enigmatic fragments that persist. They have discovered correlations between Alamut's architecture and ancient mathematical patterns, between Ismaili poetry and complex symbolic logic systems. But each discovery invariably leads to a more profound question: were these patterns accidental? Or were they an intentional component of a deliberate system designed so that only insiders could ever comprehend them? Some theories suggest that the spirit of the assassins continues to live on in other secret traditions, in Sufi orders, in the Knights Templar, even in 18th century European secret societies. No direct proof exists, but the intriguing overlaps in their structures, symbols, and rituals have prompted many to ask: did the assassins vanish? Or did they merely fragment and flow into other hidden currents, enduring without their original name? And perhaps the ultimate question is not what the truth is, but rather, do we even truly desire to uncover it? Or are we simply captivated by a mystery that resolutely remains unsolved? The assassins were a group characterized by decisive action. But their greatest legacy may paradoxically lie in inaction, or in the precise moment they vanished. Because sometimes, the most haunting thing is not the discernible figure lurking in a dark alley, but the quiet, unsettling certainty that someone once stood there and left no discernible trace behind. The assassin's reflex in the digital age. Our contemporary world stands in stark contrast to the era in which the assassins once roamed. There are no longer stone fortresses perched dramatically on cliffs, no couriers riding furiously through the night to deliver encrypted orders. We inhabit a world of pervasive satellite surveillance, real-time data streams, ubiquitous smartphones, advanced artificial intelligence, and sophisticated algorithms that ostensibly anticipate our thoughts before we even formulate them. And in a world such as this, one might naturally assume there is no longer any space for those who choose to remain hidden. But strangely, it is precisely in this epoch of total surveillance that the shadow of the assassins becomes more palpably visible than ever before. Modern life presents a profound paradox. The more interconnected we become, the more intensely we are observed. Every step we take, every online search we conduct, every message we transmit leaves an indelible trace. We do not reside within a traditional fortress. We exist within a global glass house, where every single behavior can be meticulously measured, extensively profiled, and subtly redirected. And in this invisible, all-encompassing atmosphere, a quiet, unsettling thought begins to surface. I am being controlled. It is precisely here that the assassins, though temporally distant, re-emerge as a powerful symbol of instinctive resistance. They do not represent violence. They embody the fundamental right to remain anonymous, the inherent right to think privately, and the invaluable ability to operate outside the established system. These are profound yearnings that the modern human may not even consciously recognize they possess. A teenager with headphones, eyes intently fixed on a glowing screen, is sometimes not merely engaging in a game. He is living a piece of instinct that the real world no longer permits. The profound desire to exist outside the system. In games, in films, in fiction, in art, the archetype of the assassin materializes as an invisible companion, whispering a silent truth. It is still possible to cling to a piece of personal freedom in a world that feels pre-programmed, and that powerful feeling does not reside solely within the realm of imagination. It manifests whenever someone consciously limits what they share, opts for privacy mode, encrypts a message, abandons social media, or physically covers their webcam lens. These are no longer random, isolated acts. They are the modern signals of a silent rebellion. And if you observe more closely, you will discern this to be the very resurrection of the assassin spirit. No explicit orders, no physical fortress, just the profound awareness that something must be meticulously guarded for oneself. The modern world may no longer permit an organization like the assassins to exist in their traditional form. But that same world awakens the very reflexes they once lived by. When someone utilizes a VPN to mask their geographical location. When a journalist encrypts their conversations to evade surveillance. When an anonymous coder unearths a scandal and releases it to the world. They do not label themselves Fidei, but they embody the very same spirit. Acting from the shadows for a truth deemed greater than themselves. And in that profound sense, the assassins are no longer mere history, they are a condition of the modern mind. A part of us perpetually yearns to know the truth. Another part is gripped by the fear that knowing it might cost us everything. And between these two compelling forces, we make quiet decisions to live a little less exposed, just as they once did. There may no longer be daggers glinting in the dark. But each time we question our personal freedom, our inherent right to privacy, our trust in the established system, each time we engage in such introspection, the shadow of a group who once thrived through silence and sheer willpower lives anew within us. The ever-present question. At this juncture in history, the assassins have long been described as something that once existed and then simply vanished. But if one meticulously examines their operational methods, a crucial insight emerges. The assassins were never constructed as a conventional organization. They possessed a fragmented structure, inherently self-adjusting, self-sustaining, and most importantly, founded not upon tangible property, but upon a profound philosophy. And that is why a theory, quietly whispered by numerous modern scholars yet rarely articulated aloud, begins to take shape. That the assassins never truly vanished. They simply transmuted their form. Like open-source code that belongs to no single entity, the assassin mindset can endure within any individual or any group. As long as they adhere to one fundamental principle, act with deliberate purpose and profound silence. Not for personal gain, but for a truth that transcends the self. Consider today's world. There are human rights activists who materialize from seemingly nowhere, expose shocking truths, then disappear into the bewildering fog of data. There are whistleblowers embedded within massive institutions who intentionally go off-grid, simply to bring incriminating evidence into the light. They carry no daggers. They do not reside on remote mountaintops. But their motives, their methods, and their subsequent disappearances feel eerily familiar. There even exist non-organizations. Today, groups with no defined leaders, no physical headquarters, no discernible hierarchy. And yet, they profoundly unsettle governments, colossal corporations, and global power brokers. They operate through advanced encryption, distributed knowledge, and a strict adherence to one rule: no single individual possesses the entirety of the truth. Each person is merely a fragment, precisely mirroring the decentralized structure the assassins employed to survive for over 2 centuries. And that leads to a broader hypothesis. The assassins do not need to exist in their ancient form. They can be reborn through specific behaviors, through particular structures, through profound thought. In an age where everything is meticulously monitored, the most effective way to remain hidden is to be in plain sight. They might exist in encrypted forums, behind anonymous usernames. They might be the scientist meticulously crafting privacy algorithms, the designer building tools specifically to circumvent censorship, the humble teacher in a quiet village sharing ideas that subtly fracture the walls of deception. The key is that they have no need to label themselves assassins. They never truly did. All it requires is one individual who understands and acts at the opportune moment, and the spirit lives again, without a name, without overt recognition. And if that theory holds true, then perhaps you have already encountered them. A single post you read, a message that prompted you to question something, a quiet gesture you once witnessed, could carry the very DNA of a way of thinking. Nurtured across centuries, surviving every hunt, outlasting every empire, not to kill, but to safeguard the last vestiges of truth in a world overwhelmed by incessant noise. There are symbols that owe their existence to power. Some endure through triumphant victories, but a rare few persist simply because they pose a question that no one dares to answer. The assassins were one such entity. From their very inception, they deliberately embraced the path of paradox. To kill in order to safeguard life, to vanish in order to preserve truth, to issue no formal declaration, yet compel the entire world to take notice. And within that profound paradox, they awaken something far deeper, doubt. Because every human being, irrespective of the system they inhabit, an empire, a faith, a nation, a corporation, carries a primal suspicion deep within their core. What if everything around me is proceeding on the wrong trajectory? And when the system becomes too vast, too restrictive, too seemingly perfect, we no longer know where to seek answers or whom to ask. So we retreat into silence. And in that profound silence, the assassins emerge. Not with ready-made answers, but with the audacious courage to ask the question on our behalf. They never instructed us what to believe. They never demanded action. They simply appeared, a blurred face, a silent strike, at a time when all others remained quiescent. And when we gaze upon them, what chills us is not the dagger clutched in their hand, but the haunting question. What did they witness that compelled them to act in such a manner? The assassins did not inspire admiration in the conventional sense. No grand speeches, no towering monuments, no heroic anthems were dedicated to them. But they instilled fear without generating widespread hatred. They aroused curiosity, yet never a boldness sufficient to approach them. And above all, they compelled people to doubt themselves, in the quiet recesses of their own minds. That is power, a kind that defies conventional measurement. We live in a modern world where justice is ostensibly defined by law. But sometimes we all feel that something is still amiss, still unsaid, still unresolved. And in that poignant moment, we do not require a military. We do not require a revolution. We simply need a solitary nod in the darkness. Someone who comprehends and acts at the opportune moment. That is what the assassins ultimately became, the embodiment of that precise moment. The one who utters no words, but acts at the exact place, in the precise hour. Not because they are inherently good, but because they perceive what is subtly going awry. And perhaps the most compelling aspect is that they never demanded to be believed. They did not preach. They did not apologize. They did not plead for understanding. They simply acted and then disappeared. They left a cut. Not merely on flesh, but across the very current of history. A single incision. Thin, silent, surgical, yet deep enough to make empires pause, reflect, and experience fear once again. They compel us to ask ourselves, if someone is willing to kill to protect a truth we cannot perceive, what profound reality have we ourselves overlooked? And when that question reverberates, we begin to re-examine everything we once held as certain. Can law be flawed? Can religion be abused? Can governments distort the truth? And if everything we presume to know can be twisted, then what remains that is truly straight? We have journeyed together through the expanse of a narrative with no discernible beginning and no true end. Because the assassins were never intended to be a complete legend. They were an emptiness deliberately sculpted by absence. In a world where every power craves visibility, recognition, and praise, they chose to leave behind only a question. That question is not inscribed on paper. It resides in the weary eyes of kings who once discovered daggers resting on their pillows. In the abrupt alteration of a law. In the quiet death with no known cause. In the way an empire silently recedes, not because it was defeated, but because it knew it was being watched. We may never apprehend the full truth. And perhaps we are not meant to, because sometimes what truly matters is not their story, but the profound feeling they instill within us. A feeling devoid of a name, but one that makes us hesitate when we hear a voice that is too loud, or perceive a power that is too quiet, or witness someone moving against the prevailing current. Not for fame, not for gain, but because they perceive something fundamentally amiss. If the assassins left behind any true legacy, it was not their daggers, or their fortress, or their coded symbols. It was a fundamental human capacity we all possess, yet few dare to employ, the courage to stand alone in silence for what is right. And if that has stirred something within you, if you find yourself still contemplating, still seeking the missing pages of history, the truths that do not appear in textbooks, the individuals with no statues who nonetheless alter the course of entire eras, then remain, because this is not the conclusion. It is merely a pause,